Hello YouTube, and welcome back to something a little new. This is a different series that I'm going to start called Second Glances, much like Second Chances. And what the purpose of this series is to review OSs that I have looked at in the past to see how they've changed for the better, for the worse, stayed the same, and what's happened with them. So, without further ado, hello YouTube! This is DasGregor, and welcome to Second Glances. Anyway, I'm not sure how that intro will work, or what I'll do with that. But I do hope to review a few things that I've looked at, try some different operating systems that are non-Linux based. Last week I did take a look at BSD. Now, before I get beat up too much, because I had some that responded back and said, you know, you really need to learn something a little bit more before you do a review. I know Linux inside and out for the most part. I'm not an expert, but I'm comfortable enough with it to know how to make things work. BSD is a totally different animal with different ways of doing things. More Unix-like, I understand. And I've worked a lot with Linux and not really ever with BSD. It's not something, in fact, I think PC BSD, which I looked at last week, was the first time ever that I had a GUI working within BSD outside of just getting it installed to a command line interface. That being said, this is not BSD. Welcome to WattOS Revision 8 Debian style. Now, I just looked at WattOS no more than 2 months ago, I think at the end of March. And it was Ubuntu. Well, I was asked a couple weeks ago to re-look at WattOS, and even though it's only been a couple months since the last review, I decided why not start with this with Second Glances to introduce the channel playlist and go from there. That, and maybe I thought WattOS might be a little fresher in my mind as to what the problems were before, how have they resolved them now. Of course, the biggest problem was that it was Ubuntu based. And of course, while I had to cross my fingers and oh please, on an update don't blow up the system, and it didn't. It was actually more stable than some Ubuntu-based distros that I'd worked with. So it was already a pretty good distribution. But now we have the stability, the wonderfulness of Debian on this system. And it is now based on Wheezy at this point in time. And it is still just as stable, if not much more stable, being Debian-based. Now, WattOS Revision 8 comes in 3 different flavors. There is the minimalist Openbox desktop with Microwatt. There is the middle-of-the-ground LXDE. And there is the little bit slightly robust Mate version. All of these, of course, come in 32-bit and 64-bit versions. If you are a minimalist and you like the bare bones of everything, then Microwatt might be your cup of tea. If you're looking for something more KDE without the steroids, LXDE, and if you are a GNOME fan, not of 3.0, but of the great 2.x series, then Mate is your flavor of choice. Now, last time I looked at Mate, and it was impressive and very nice, but this time I decided to look at LXDE just for a slight comparison and different desktop GUI. The install for WattOS was very simple, easy to use. They did revamp it a bit, and it was not scary in the least bit. I had almost no problems. Well, I say almost no. I had no problems booting into the media. I put it on a USB stick and was able to easily boot to that. I have installed this on my HP DV8T hardware, which is about 4 or 5 years old, but it is still quite robust for its time. I built it with 6 gigs of RAM about 4 years ago. It's a Core i7 processor, and it is quite fast, so it works well. However, due to some hard drive failures that I had last week, one in particular, I had to replace the first hard drive in this laptop, and so I decided let's install this as a primary OS and not have it see anything else, just see how it runs. And that might be something I might want to do, dedicating the whole, a lot of times I've always said Gen 2 was my base distro, and so I would never put on the boot loader for any of the OSs I tested. I always would do my best to tell it to install somewhere where I didn't care because it wouldn't affect it. And then I'd always use my Gen 2 bootloader management software with Grub 1 to go ahead and load up all that. Well, I decided this time, let's let the bootloader for the OS install. We'll use Grub 2, which is what it's asking for in this particular version, and we'll try that out for a bit. And so far, everything is pretty good. It started up, no issues. Sound worked out of the box. Networking worked out of the box. My mouse worked out of the box. Everything seems to work out of the box, no problem in this particular flavor. Now you say, well, that's the way it ought to be, shouldn't it? It's the way it ought to be, but I've done a lot of distro reviews, and I'll tell you one thing, not all distros are created equal. Some are better than others. They may be based upon the same specs, but they still have bad problems. So, it's always good to discuss those, because if you think that all distros are created equally, you are mistaken. They are not all created equally. So anyway, if we take a quick look down here in the lower right corner, you will notice we have a power button. Lets you shut down, reboot, suspend, hibernate, log out, or cancel. We're going to cancel. I'm doing a review here. We have, of course, the time, the network, power, and network traffic icon. Now, as I said, this is very minimal for this operating system. So if we look a quick glance at the applications, you will see PCMan FM for the file manager, a calculator for the calculator, a simple image viewer. LeafPad is the only text editor that is a GUI based text editor that it comes with at this point in time. LX terminal for a user terminal, and of course it gives you a root terminal as well, and an archive manager. I installed the GIMP. It was actually a part of a previous video that went bad. We move on. Shotwell is what it came with. Internet, it came with Iceweasel, FileZilla, and Transmission, an FTP, torrent, and a web browser. Chromium Web Browser was on Mate, and I don't know if it's on the newest Mate, but this does come with FireWeasel. I installed Chromium myself, just make sure to see if it would come on, because that is an application that I have found in some distributions that isn't available or doesn't work. And so as a test for some of the things that I do on different distributions, just to see how stuff works, I will install some software. I'll try out different things just to try to see, does one work better than the other? Does it still operate correctly? No problems there. You will notice that the Office option here has almost nothing in there except for a PDF reader. That can be remedied, as we will talk about a little bit later with Semantic. Sound and video, it came with Audacious. I installed GUVC. Simple Screen Recorder, of course, I put on. As I will always say, it is the best screen capturing software that I have ever been recommended to use, and I am so glad that in the early days when I first started doing reviews again, somebody mentioned it to me, told me about it, because I love it. It might not always be the easiest to install based upon not the software of Simple Screen Recorder, but the dependencies that are pre-installed on, say, an operating system. But it is the easiest once you get it installed to use, run, and they have done some updates to it. They've added some profiles and different stuff like that to make it even easier. I really like Simple Screen Recorder. VLC Media Player came on it, which I believe in my last review of WattOS I had to install that manually. XF Burn was put on there for burning CDs. We have system tools, of course, with some basic functions and your preferences area. Now we will look here at Synaptic Package Manager. For those of you who have seen Synaptic Package Manager, you already know what I'm going to say. But for those of you looking at WattOS for the first time and maybe review an R8 version, Synaptic Package Manager is your friend to install software. It will ask you, of course, for your username and password. You type that in and it brings this up. Now, anything your heart desires, and this is what I did when I installed the GIMP to show you in a previous video that failed because something went wrong with my recording. Not the fault of the system, but the user error. It happens sometimes, guys, I admit. Even me. Yes. Yes, I make mistakes. Yes, yes, I make mistakes sometimes. Anyway. Anyway, so inside here, anything your heart desires, say you want LibreOffice, because we already did the GIMP. Let's move that over. If I'm either going to hide my whole face or hide a little bit of it. There we go. If we look up LibreOffice, you will see that we do have options for LibreOffice right here, the productivity sweep. If you're a fan of KDE and the K-Office, you can install K-Office. Just do a search for it and you'd click on it just simply like this, for instance. It's going to tell you, of course, that it needs all this extra stuff to install. You mark it, it marks it, apply. It's going to give you one last time to kind of look over things. And sometimes it's really, really important to do that, because one time I wasn't paying attention to a package that I was installing, and it not only said to be installed and what was unchanged, but it also had to be removed. And when it removed some stuff, it's like, oh drat, I needed that stuff, and I didn't realize it was going to replace something that was really important. So it's important to, when you do this sort of thing, to take a look at that and make sure that it's good. And then, of course, it tells you here, one package will be held back, not upgraded. 67 new packages will be installed. It's going to need 388 megs of extra space, and 111 megs will be downloaded. We hit apply, and it's going to start downloading. And oh no! You know what? I think I've told you this before. We look down here, and my wireless is turned off because it is a bug I have in my DV8T. Curse you, DV8T. My DV8T has an issue where the wireless has one of those silly little touch things. And if I flex just the wrong way, because of how wide the system is, because it's an 18-inch system, I think it's an 18.4-inch screen, that flexing causes some touch issue that blows up my wireless. So let's pretend I hadn't hit that button just yet. We'll do that. Hit apply. We talked all about this. Apply. Now here we go. It should start downloading, of course, all the software you need, 67 packages, and it'll start getting all that stuff down there as quickly as it can. It's getting not so good speeds. I mean, it should be getting at least 2 or 3 megs per second, but I won't complain. It'll get it when it gets it. While it installs that, my point, of course, with all of this is that Synaptic is a great package manager that's going to find just about anything that you'd ever want or need to install on this particular flavor of Linux. WattOS is really good, lightweight, will work on a lot of older hardware as well as newer hardware. Now, I know I'd mentioned in my last one that because it was Ubuntu based, I wouldn't recommend it. I would go to something like Antix because it was Debian, and I've used Antix on a lot of different legacy hardware, and it works so well. Well, now that WattOS is now a Debian based, I would recommend it as well for a lot of older hardware. Debian isn't always the easiest to learn, but WattOS makes it not so difficult. It makes it simple to get in there. And I would say that if you're needing something rejuvenated, an older piece of hardware, and you don't know if it can handle a full-blown KDE, you should try it out. If it doesn't work, try the Microwatt. Openbox can be a little scary sometimes, depending upon how it operates. It's very lightweight on the desktop environment. That's why I like the LXDE flavor, and I think LXDE might work. I installed LXDE, and I digress, on my Raspberry Pi at one time just to see how it would operate. And Raspberry Pi has a very small processor, and it seemed to work out pretty decent with that, with only 512 megs of RAM, I think that's in my Raspberry Pi. So that seemed to be okay. So try it out, see how it works, see what you think. And as you see, we've now gotten this installed, or at least downloaded, and it's installing. It'll go quite quickly now. It'll be done with another 5 to 10 seconds, and we will be able to just show you real quick that now you have an Office suite within your WattOS distribution. And believe me, if you had to do this in Gen 2, it would take you at least with a Core i7 processor and 6 gigs of RAM, at least 2 hours, maybe 2.5 if things aren't, things are a little slow, to install this package. Now you say you're crazy. 2.5 hours? Hey, when I used to install this on my older HP, which is a 5040 that I bought in 2002, it would take OpenOffice, because that was before LibreOffice, 8 to 10 hours to compile and install. So when it installs it within a couple hours, that's cool. Of course, you say, why in the world would you do that when it looks like you've just downloaded it and installed LibreOffice in no more than 5 minutes? Yeah, I know, the trade-offs, but I love Gen 2. Gen 2 is such a great OS. And now that it's installed, we should be able to go to Office, and you will see here's LibreOffice, and if we click on it, there we are. Minimize that, bring this over, and you've got LibreOffice just like that with all your desktop publishing needs. So I hope you've enjoyed WattOS. I will close the review at this point. If it's morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having, I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support. We will talk to you all later. Bye, guys.